Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to today's biology class. Today's class is the fifth class of the chapter 11, Reproduction in Organisms. In the previous fourth class, we have discussed on the topics. The first one was the detailed process of fertilization, how fertilization takes place inside the flower, the consequence of fertilization, the development of new sporophyte. Before fertilization process, the two gametes reside at the gametophytic stage, and when they fertilize, they turn into a new sporophytic phase, and the sporophyte develops inside the seed. The seed becomes matured enough, and the seed contains the endosperm and also the embryo, and the embryo contains three parts: cotyledon, plumule, and radicle. We also know the life cycle of flowering plants. The life cycle of flowering plants alternates between the gametophytic haploid phase and the sporophytic diploid phase through generation to generation. And we also know the post-fertilization changes that takes place in the ovary and ovule of a flower. The ovary turns into fruit, the ovule turns into seed, and other parts are converted into other components of a fruit. We also discussed about the definition of true fruit and false fruit. We know the example of true fruit as mango, and apple is an example of false fruit. Today at the fifth class, we will discuss about the asexual reproduction process that takes place in lower animals and the sexual reproduction process that takes place in higher animals. The external fertilization process that takes place in aquatic animals and the internal fertilization process in terrestrial animals. The significance of fertilization in animals, why the fertilization process is important for sexual reproduction in animals, and the role of hormones in reproduction. The hormones which are particularly responsible for the reproductive purpose, for example testosterone, progesterone, etc. And the stage of development of human embryo, the 9-month-long development process of human embryo will be described into only short 8 steps. And during this development process, an temporary organ called placenta is formed, and we will describe about the role and how it functions, how it benefits the fetus. At first, we will discuss about the asexual reproduction process in aquatic animals. At first, we will describe about the asexual reproduction process that takes place in lower animals, for example in hydra and jellyfish. Actually, the asexual reproduction in animals takes place in the lower classes such as porifera and Nitaria, and sexual reproduction takes place in all the higher animals. The classes of animals except the porifera and Nitaria, the upper classes always follow the sexual reproduction process, and these lower animals can follow either sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. So let's see how a hydra undergoes asexual reproduction. Here we see a hydra, that is an aquatic animal. You can find it in pond or even at the aquarium. That is about few millimeter long. That is producing an outgrowth in its body that is just similar with the mother hydra, and this newly producing outgrowth is called the daughter or baby hydra that is emerging out from the mother hydra. And after some time, this daughter hydra will be detached from the mother's body and will swim freely and live freely in the water. So in this process, a single hydra can produce multiple number of buds and multiple number of daughter hydra by this budding process, asexual reproduction. And also jellyfish can undergo both sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction process. We say that jellyfish can remain in 2 phases of their life: the adult stage, that is freely floating stage, in water, that is called the Medusa phase. The name Medusa uh, comes from the Greek mythological character Medusa, uh, who has a numerous number of snakes on her head, and the tentacles present in the Hydra, mature adult Hydra, looks like the snakes of the Medusa. That's why it has got such name. At the Medusa stage, the adult jellyfish releases sperm and ovum, and the ovum are fertilized, and then this fertilized egg produces a larva. And as a definition, we know that larva is called any immature phase of life of an animal that is very much different in physiological appearance than its adult stage. And this larva then goes at the seabed and attaches with the soil and turns into an outgrowth like a plant, and this phase is called polyp phase. And this polyp phase then grows further and produces multiple number of disc-like structures called buds, and eventually these buds are released from their body, and from each of the bud it can produce either a adult male jellyfish or female jellyfish. Here we see the polyp reproduces asexually by producing numerous number of buds from its body part. So that is the asexual reproduction that takes place in polyp phase, and at the Medusa phase it reproduces sexually. So that's how jellyfish can undergo both sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction in its lifetime. And that is also true for Hydra. Hydra can also undergo sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction always takes place. Sexual reproduction is followed in all higher animals. The higher animals have no other option. The higher animals cannot undergo asexual reproduction. Here we see the anesogamous sexual reproduction, while a sperm fertilizes a ovum that is much more bigger in size compared to the sperm. So the two gametes are not physically same. When we describe about external fertilization, we mean that the event of fertilization takes place outside the body, and internal fertilization that takes place inside the human body, inside the female organ animal's body. That means inside the female reproductive organ. External fertilization is uniquely found in aquatic animals. That means it can be found in fishes or in amphibians, frog or fish. And internal fertilization that takes place in all terrestrial animals that lives on land. Here we see a salmon fish, a female salmon fish has released ova on the seafloor, and after some time a male salmon fish came and released sperm over the ova, so that the ova gets fertilized with the sperm, and after that it hatches to form small fishes. Now we will discuss about the significance of fertilization process. If we consider this fertilization process in case of human, then we start from the puberty period of a male or of a boy. So what happens in a boy during the puberty period? The male reproductive organ contains numerous number of male reproductive mother cell that undergoes meiosis cell division to produce sperm, and this phenomenon of producing sperm starts from the puberty time, and this process is called gametogenesis. The process of producing gamete is called gametogenesis, that takes place by meiosis process, and this process continues until the death of a man. But at the later age, the production rate of sperm decreases significantly, but it still continues. And in the life of a girl or woman, inside the female reproductive system there is ovary, This ovary contains numerous number of female reproductive mother cells, and when a girl reaches to the puberty age, at the time she contains approximately about 10,000 female reproductive mother cells or follicles inside her ovary. So when at the puberty onset, when the puberty starts, then the ovary actually uh, releases a mature ovum. How this process takes place inside the ovary? Every month the ovary recruits about 20 female reproductive mother cells, and among these 20 only one becomes mature enough to produce a functional ovum. So in expense of 20 reproductive mother cell, only one ovum is produced every month. And this process also takes place by meiosis process. And what happens, these approximately 10,000 reserved reproductive mother cells that was at the puberty time, that decreases in number every month, because every month about 20 or 25 reproductive mother cells are decreasing in number, is being expensed. So what happens when the girl reaches at the age of 45 or 50, when she becomes a woman, mid-aged woman, then inside her ovary no more female reproductive mother cell exists then. So at the time she doesn't have any more reproductive mother cell to produce ovum. As a result, she cannot conceive further. So when sperm fertilizes an ovum, then it produces a zygote. So what is the importance of fertilization event? It is important because it recombines the characters of father and mother. The characteristics from father and the mother that is attained, that is restored in the zygote, and it reestablishes the chromosome number, because sperm has 23 chromosomes and ovum has 23 chromosomes. But when this 23 chromosomes combine, it produces a 46 chromosomed zygote child that has exactly the same number of chromosome like the father or mother. And it also determines the sex of the embryo. We know that sperm can contain either X chromosome or Y chromosome as the sex chromosome. So when a sperm having X chromosome fertilizes an ovum, and then the zygote is female XX. And when a sperm containing Y sex chromosome fertilizes the ovum, then it produces XY zygote, that is, the child will be male. Now we are talking about hormones in reproduction process. So before going to the reproductive hormones, first we will describe about what are hormones. Hormones are protein type biochemicals that are secreted from endocrine glands and released into blood to control various physiological and metabolic activities of human body. And at first we have to understand that hormones are very much different from enzyme. But enzymes are also protein-like substances, but they are different from hormones. Hormones are secreted from endocrine glands, while enzymes are secreted from exocrine glands. Hormones are released into blood, while the enzymes are released through some ducts, not in the blood. And hormones are released into the blood and enters into the bloodstream, and these hormone chemicals reach to the every part of the body, but it produces an action on the target organ to induce various physiological and metabolic activities of the human body, while enzymes actually help in different chemical reactions, in digestion or in different metabolic chemical reactions. So we know hormones are released from some endocrine glands. So what are these endocrine glands and what are the hormones released from these endocrine glands? We will see them. For example, hypothalamus that is located at the brain, that produces some hormones like TRH, CRH, GHRH, that are actually the short form of different hormones. We will find them at the later slide. Dopamine, vasopressin, somatostatin, and they are the hormones produced at the hypothalamus endocrine gland. And in the brain there is also pineal gland, or pituitary gland. And pituitary gland is called the master gland because it produces highest number of hormones, and these hormones are very much crucial for the metabolic activities of the body. And among them there are some hormones which induces other glands to release their particular hormones. That is why it is called the control center or the master gland. This pituitary gland is called the master gland among all of the endocrine glands. And near the neck we have thyroid and parathyroid gland. At the chest we have thymus gland. At the liver it produces some hormones. In the stomach it also produces some hormones. Pancreas is famous for releasing insulin and glucagon for glucose metabolism. And adrenal gland located over the kidney that produces some androgens or male hormones. The testis that is found in the male body that produces some male hormones. And placenta or ovary and uterus that is found exclusively in women body that also produces some female hormones. And we know that placenta is not always present, but it is temporarily present during the conception time inside the woman's uterus. So these hormones, reproductive hormones, are secreted from only 6 glands, which are pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, testis, ovary, and placenta. And we see the full form of the abbreviated names of different hormones. You can check them. Now we will discuss about some important the names and functions of some important reproductive hormones. At first we start from the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland produces follicle stimulating hormone. That means this hormone acts on the follicle to mature them into fully functional ovum that works inside the ovary. And luteinizing hormone also helps in this ovulation process, and that works along with the follicle stimulating hormone. The prolactin, leukotriene that stimulates the mammary gland to produce milk, that is also a female hormone. Oxytocin in milk ejection reflex and uterine contraction, that is also exclusively a female hormone. And the adrenal gland that produces some androgens, that is male hormones, for example testosterone or androstenedione, which are responsible for development and maintenance of male characteristics. And in male body, in male reproductive organ, the testis produces testosterone, estradiol, and inhibin, which are responsible for development of male reproductive organ and secondary sexual characteristics. In female reproductive system, it contains ovary and placenta. It produces some female hormones like estrogen and progesterone, which helps in development of female reproductive system and secondary sexual characteristics. And progesterone is an important hormone to maintain the pregnancy period. So we see that these hormones are very much important for reproductive activity or for producing the male characteristics or female characteristics in male or female body. Now we will discuss about the development process of an embryo. We know that this is a female reproductive organ, that is actually the uterus, that is actually the right half part of the uterus that contains the fallopian tube and a ovary. The female reproductive system contains a uterus and fallopian tubes and 2 ovary. Now we are seeing the right half side of a female reproductive organ. It has a similar part on the left side. So in ovary, it produces a single ovum by ovulation process. So we have discussed about this, that every month about 20 ovary, every month about 20 follicles or female germinal mother cells are employed to produce a single ovum. But among these 20 recruited follicles, only one turns into a matured ovum. So this matured ovum is released from the ovary and enters into the fallopian tube, and this the process of producing a functional ovum is called the ovulation process. And this egg then travels through the lining through the way of the fallopian tube, and wants to come into the open space inside the uterus. And during this process it goes further and reaches to the uterus, and then stays here for and survives for several days. And if during this traveling period, during this survival time about for several days, if no sperm can enter into the female reproductive organ and cannot fertilize the ovum, then the ovum ruptures along with the uterine wall inside the female reproductive system, and then is discharged in form of blood. And that is actually the cause of menstrual cycle or periodic bleeding in women. So the cause is actually when the ovum is not fertilized, and while it waits for fertilization process, but during this time it is not fertilized, then it is disrupted and destroyed along with the along with some tissues inside the uterus. That is the reason of bleeding every month. So during this process, if a ovum is released into the fallopian tube and it travels towards the uterus, and by that time if sperm enters into the uterus and then eventually meet with the traveling ovum, then what will happen? Fertilization will happen. And after the fertilization event or production of zygote, after one day this zygote undergoes the first mitotic cell division, that is called the cleavage. So that means the cleavage takes place after 24 hours or about 36 hours of formation of zygote. Then it produces 4 cells, then 8 cells, and then 16 cells, and it goes on, and that increases in number by mitosis cell division. And at the 4th day, this embryo turns into a cluster of 16 cells, which is called morula. So here we see this 16 celled part is called morula, and then morula then develops further to produce a ball-like structure called blastocyst. And this blastocyst is a ball-like structure that further travels towards the uterus, and then at the 9th day of formation of zygote, this blastocyst is attached with the uterine wall. This phenomenon is called the implantation process, and this process is called the implantation process. So what happens then after implantation? A new organ, a temporary organ, is produced around the blastocyst inside the uterus, that is called placenta. So what is placenta? Placenta is a temporary organ produced inside the uterus to facilitate the development of blastocyst. So the formation of placenta begins after implantation, and its formation is completed at the 12th week of fertilization event. And this placenta has some crucial roles for the development of embryo, because it performs the functions instead of lungs and kidney. That means the supposed functions of lungs and kidney are performed by the placenta for the fetus. And this placenta also produces some hormones that are crucial for maintenance of pregnancy of the mother. Here we see this pink colored thick lining represents the uterus of the mother's womb, and inside this we see that a fetus or embryo that is growing and that is attached with the uterus with umbilical cord. So everything that is inside the uterus now is called the placenta, and inside this placenta we have different parts. That is the fetus or embryo that is attached with the placenta with an umbilical cord, and then this fetus is floating in a liquid that is called the amniotic fluid that protects the embryo from injury, and this fluid is enclosed by a thin membrane called amnion, And now we will describe about the function of placenta. What is the function of placenta for the development of fetus or embryo? Here we see that some blood vessels come out from the mother's body and enters into the uterus. So an artery coming from the mother's body enters into the uterus and supplies blood into this chamber. That is actually, this space is actually a blood containing chamber. So, and this chamber is filled with the mother's blood that comes through artery. And mother's blood contains comparatively higher amount of oxygen and higher amount of nutrients like glucose, amino acid, etc. And the umbilical cord that comes in the uterus, and this umbilical cord has arteries and vein, and the fetus body is actually respirating, and that is consuming and producing different nitrogenous waste materials as well as carbon dioxide. So the waste materials, the blood containing these waste materials come through the umbilical cord and then travels through some arteries and comes at the common space. So here we see through the umbilical cord the blood, the contaminated blood of fetus comes through the artery of fetus and comes here, and this artery then also splits into small parts called capillaries, and so that the capillary contains the contaminated blood of the fetus. So then what happens, we see the fresh blood that has filled the chamber releases the oxygen and nutrients to the fetus blood inside the capillary, and the fetus blood will release the nitrogenous waste materials and carbon dioxide to the mother's blood by diffusion process, as the membrane of the capillary is so much thin, so that can allow the exchange of these materials by diffusion process. So by this process, the fresh blood coming from the mother's body gets contaminated from the fetus, and the fetus blood absorbs the nutrients and materials from the mother's blood, and then comes out and then returns to the fetus in form of vein, and that's how the fetus releases the polluted materials, contaminated materials, and then absorbs the necessary oxygen and nutrient materials from the mother's blood. So that is how the uterus allows the exchange of these materials for the fetus. Now we are discussing about the development phases of embryo in short 8 phases or 8 images. Actually, the development of embryo is a very long process that takes about 9 months, but we will describe this long process into only 8 pictures. We know that the fertilization event takes place when the ovum is combined with a sperm, and after 36 hours or about after 1 day or 36 hours later, the first cleavage takes place that produces 2 cells, and after 72 hours or at the 4th day of fertilization, by mitosis cell division, the embryo turns into a 16-celled stage called morula, and this morula turns into blastocyst, a ball-like structure, and this blastocyst is implanted at the uterine wall at the 9th day. Here we see placenta is being formed, So a placenta is formed when around the blastocyst, when that is implanted on the uterine wall. So that is the newly forming placenta, and here we see the placenta is forming and the embryo is also developing inside the placenta. And from the 9th week, it is no longer called embryo, it is called fetus. And this fetus then grows in size, the organs are developing, and after 28 weeks the fetus is fully developed in the expanded uterus, and about 38 weeks after fertilization the fetus's head turns downward. That means it is ready to come out from the mother's womb. And after that and at that time labor pain begins, and the mother releases her baby, and the child comes out from the mother's womb. So let's revise what we have learned at today's 5th class. We learned about the asexual reproduction process that takes place in lower animals and sexual reproduction process that takes place in higher animals. We also know the external fertilization process that takes place in aquatic animals and the internal fertilization that takes place in terrestrial animals. The significance of fertilization in animals to establish the chromosome number to determine the sex of embryo. The role of hormones in reproduction like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, etc. The stage of development of human embryo, morula, blastula, first cleavage, and then formation of placenta. And we have also discussed about the role of placenta for development of the embryo and fetus inside mother's womb. At the end of the class you have a homework. Discuss the importance of placenta for development of embryo. আজকের মতো ক্লাস এখানেই শেষ। সবাই ভালো থাকো ইনশাআল্লাহ। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।